Hey, Catholic Divas, before we get started on this episode, we would like to remind you to go ahead and subscribe and share. And also, if you could go to the Apple podcast and write a review, those reviews help our podcast get up on the charts, and then more people can know about it. So if you do that, we would really appreciate it. But come on into the podcast. Hey, this is Mama Jane.
And this is Mama Vicky. Welcome to the Cycles and Sanctity podcast.
I'm a Billings ovulation method instructor and a certified Catholic mindset coach.
And I'm a labor and delivery nurse, an IBCLC, and a La Leche League leader.
We're here to share with you the beauty and the pain of your cycles.
Have you considered honoring your cycle throughout the journey of your womanhood?
Have you ever considered your cycle as a tool toward your holiness?
Well, sisters, it is. We're excited to walk this journey with you.
So go grab your favorite journal and pen and your hot beverage, and let's do this. Welcome back, Catholic Divas, to the podcast. We are so happy that you are here, and we are especially happy that Mama Vicky is here today. She has been journeying, as we mentioned, with her family, with Graham, with all the things, but she's here today, and we are so excited because we have a very, very special guest. She's a dear friend to each of us. And one of the things that I hope that you hear in this podcast is not only the individual friendship, but the community friendship. Because remember, we never walk alone. We always need companionship. Even Christ in his passion didn't walk alone. He had Simon of Cyrene carrying his cross. He met Veronica, who wiped his face. And of course, he had his dearest mother walking the way of the cross with him. So, Mama Vicky, why don't you go ahead and introduce and share a little story of like how you met Jen, because you are the first one that brought this beautiful friendship together.
I will claim that. I will say she was mine first. Anyway, hey, we're so happy to have Jen DellaCrosse on our show today. I met Jen. I'm going to try to do the short version. I had 6 kids. I don't know if I was yet pregnant with the 7th, but she was there when I did get pregnant with the 7th. So I'm in church, and what I think happened is that here's this single soldier. She comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, I'm the oldest of 7, and if you ever need any help or just anything, just hit me up." And I was like, "Okay, great." And I don't know, might have been a day, but it might have been that actual night that I was like, "Hey, remember when you said you wanted to help? Can you come for dinner?" Like as soon as you can get here. And boom, that's it. Jen was in our life. And she was the first person I ever left my kids with to go overnight. And we just started building this beautiful friendship. And Jen is such a beautiful Catholic woman. Everyone she comes into contact with, she helps in a positive light. And I know she's not perfect because she's human, but she's pretty fantastic. And then we all had to leave. We were all stationed out in California at the same place. And then Jen got orders to, I think you went to Jacksonville first for nursing school. And then, or I don't remember how it went, but you went to El Paso. And that's where Mama Jane was. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have to meet my Aunt Jane. And then take it away from there. And she went and met Aunt Jane. Or maybe Jen could tell the version of how she thought we met.
No, I loved it. I remember I walked up to Father Michael and I said, "I really miss being around kids and families. You got anybody here you think could kind of use my services?" He goes, "Oh, do I? Come on, baby girl, follow me." And I followed him right over to Vicky. He goes, "This is Vicky." It was instantaneous. It was just friendship at first sight. I loved her energy and I loved her just love of her kids. So yeah, you did call me. It was a couple days later, but I remember you were like, "Do you mean it?" I said, "Yeah, I meant it." And you're like, "Come over now, save my child." I said, "Oh, I like that. Even better. I'm coming. I'm here." It was so cool being part of a family. And so, I'm the oldest of 7 myself. So going into the army and just being a single soldier was tough. It was a hard transition. It was kind of lonely. I mean, I liked friends and I liked how, being out and kind of on my own, but I missed that little family life, and hanging out with Vicky and her family just fed that part that I needed so much. So, and look at us here, Vic, 20 years later, still besties. And then I got to meet Jane through it. So you guys, it's just a reminder that sometimes what we're doing doesn't matter as much as who we're doing it with or who we meet along the way, because that is all part of it too. So.
I know you probably don't remember this part, but it was very significant for me when I met you. Vicky had told me that you were there. You moved to Fort Bliss. I needed to talk to you, blah, blah, blah. I had 4 kids at the time. We'd had a miscarriage. I'm struggling with homeschooling. I had this one child that just was giving me the run for his money.
The
And
Lord gives us that one, doesn't he?
I know. You know what? The lost sheep, right? Anyway, no, but she's doing, God has a very beautiful sense of humor. But Vicky they were driving through from California back to Virginia. And I'm going to tell this part of the story. Vicky comes to my house. We're all excited because 3 of her kids were the same age as 3 of my kids. And while she's my niece, our kids are the same age. So it's almost more like sisters. And she says to me, we got to go to the Walmart and get a pregnancy test because my husband will not have sex with me. He swears I'm pregnant and I know I'm not. And I said, pregnancy test? Why don't we go get 2? And she looked at me, she's like, what? And sure enough, we went and got 2. And the next morning, she was not pregnant and I was pregnant. And that afternoon, you had reached out to Jen and she had said, okay, I'll come tomorrow. So that night, you had come and I was on such a high of being pregnant because, of course, we had thought we were just done because I had my miscarriage at 40. We had just gotten rid of all of our clothes for the baby. I thought, okay. And
How to
then,
do it.
but then the best part about it, Jen, was so we met when I basically found out that I was pregnant with James, and you ministered to me and my family. You were the big sister that my daughter needed. You were the big sister that my other children needed. And then 18 days later after the birth, I had a double pulmonary embolism and my oldest daughter was 18. And they said, we have to take care of you. We can't take care of the baby. So she came and picked the baby up with her best friend. And they're trying to deal with the 18-day-old. And she's got these 3 little ones. And the only person we could think of to call was you. And it was on a Sunday night. And you were scheduled to go on a TDY the next day. And you said, I can come tonight. And you took the kids, you pulled up the couch and just dealt with John and Rose and Joe's emotions. And I knew that my kids were going to be okay while I was fighting for my life. And it was just, we're all going to start crying, right? This is such an emotional thing. And it's just been so beautiful. And then I just remember when you decided to go to nursing school, but you were such a witness as a young soldier. This is the thing that for me, and I think this is the thing that both of us were attracted to was like, where were you as a friend for us? I mean, we're older than you. And I mean, you would come and tell me stories of typical soldiers, right? They all want to go get drunk. And you would like invite them to your apartment. Like, no, we're going to play some games. And they're like, what, Deanna? What are we doing here? You would just love to witness. And it wasn't always about the faith. It was just teaching people how to live a good and holy life. And it was so different. St. John Paul II used to say, we as Christians should be a question mark to the others around us so that they look at us and say, why are you doing things different? And I think that to me was the gift that you gave everyone and you taught me. And of course, you know, I got to be friends with your mom. And I mean, thanks be to God to your mom this time last year. If it hadn't been for your mom, I wouldn't have been able to be at the hospital with you, you know?
Yeah. We're going to have to be careful because this is supposed to be about Catholic women and NFP. We might have to do this session of sisterhood and relationships and maybe the second half NFP.
Yes,
We'll see how this pans out, listeners. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but you know what? What I remember is I just couldn't believe you, Jen. And I remember getting a discussion with you and I said, you're more blessed. God has blessed you more because you can be chaste and you can be good. And somehow you can get soldiers to do the right thing. And you're waiting for marriage. I was like, no, normal people can't do this. And you were like, give me a break. Like, what are you even talking about? It's so funny, but not in an accusatory kind of way. And I think so often, unfortunately, in church life, people want to be like, oh, well, you did it wrong and I did it right. And you are never like that. And it's enabled women to come to you and feel safe. I mean, Mama Jane, I know I told you when you first started this podcast, one of the very first ones you did, I really hadn't heard that version of you to be like, the only sin God won't forgive is when you don't come to him with. Like, you are fixable because we are all sinners. And it's just something it's easy for us humans to forget because we're so human and our ways are not God's and our ways are very, very broken. I just remember being like, you're more blessed. I know you are.
by the time we met, like I said, my daughter was 17, going on 18. And to have her have a holy friend that was older than her, but you were young enough that you could relate to my kids. And I knew that the message that you were giving to them in your own way, they were able to listen to you. And it was the same thing that I was saying, but I was saying it in a different way. And they weren't listening to me as a mom. They just,
Story of motherhood, right?
That is the story of motherhood. And that's what I say to confirmation parents. It's like your kids get to a point where it's wah, 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 wah. But that's why you have to surround yourself with good and holy people. That's why you have to really pay attention to who you're choosing as a comadre, as a godparent, as a sponsor, because they can say what you want to say in a different way and they can live in a different way. And that was your witness to my kids of like, oh, my mom's always talking about Catholic. But you're like, oh, this is a cool Catholic. Wow, Jen Danner. Well, in your former years before you got married, it was Jen Danner. And for Jen, we always combine her first and her last
Jen Danner.
name. It's Jen Danner or Jen DellaCrosse. But one of the things that I was always enamored with you and intrigued and attracted was the fact that you had heard the message of natural family planning and the gift of virginity. And you held on to that and you ministered. I mean, you and I've had shared stories of single soldiers and different roommate, male and female. And you were able to witness to them as like, look, I'm not just telling you not to have sex, but like, I'm not having, like, I know what it's like. And unfortunately, both Mama Vicky and I, we were just never told that. I've said this many times. It's like, if I had to say one regret in my whole life, is I wasn't able to give that gift of virginity to my husband the night of our wedding night. And it was such an anomaly. Like we talk about it, this is what you should do, but nobody shows you what it looks like. And that has been your gift. So would you share with us for a few minutes how, as Sandra Bullock says to Michael Orr in Blindsided, how did you get out? How did you get out? He's like, I closed my eyes and counted to 3 or whatever, right? So
well, let me just say this real quick before Jen talks. Is just that, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think so many women, we come already broken. Like the chance is missed when you finally hear about NFP and that message. It's kind of quote too late, but there's a whole remedy for that as well. And I think that's why Jane and I are just so passionate about it, because we want to minister to as many families as we can to be able to do that. But yeah. All right, Jen, take it away.
Ultimately, you guys are looking at our culture, and if school's trying to teach sex ed to our kids, it's because they think parents are dropping the ball, right? And sadly, there are a lot of parents who just don't know how to talk about this with their children. And, and I think sadly, because so many people maybe didn't live that life, they feel like they're somehow being like hypocritical to talk to their children about this, which I think the opposite, like go from your experience, share with your children, like maybe, what brought you down that path. And it's always about, especially for women, we just want to be loved. This isn't rocket science. And it's also not, as much as it's not shocking, it's very normal and good to want to be loved by someone. So the question to me isn't so much, if anything, I keep trying to remind people, you guys, like to teenagers too, because sex is good and beautiful and it's fun and it's very unitive. But outside of the context of marriage, outside of commitment, out of some, it brings all this baggage if you're not in the right time and commitment. So now all of a sudden you're pregnant and you're not married and you haven't even talked about getting married. And so now what are your options? Well, I mean, either someone's trying to talk you into some kind of abortion or you're giving your baby for adoption. Right? And so there should never be a disconnect between your motherhood and your spousalship, and having intimate, committed, sexual life together is a committed thing. And the thing is, like, because our offspring need so much time with us to raise them and let them leave our home, we know that you have to be committed to each other. You can look in the animal kingdom at animals that stay with their young for a couple days, couple hours, couple minutes, or years, because their children need that time to grow up. So in the human race, our children need us. And really, you guys, the fact that our culture is so moved away from the fact that a child deserves a mom and dad who love each other, who are
Amen.
doing their very best to love each other and be committed to each other and show that stability to their kids. And divorce happens and it's a sad tragedy, just like when a spouse dies. Those things happen. And God can make all things even right with that, which
Amen.
is so wonderful, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that we change the bar. The bar is still a life of chastity. And that's something I've actually been telling a couple of people who've reached out to me recently who were talking about kind of struggling during times of fertility. And I'm like, offer that up for the chastity of your children, right? It's not only about you. Offer it up for your kids and their chastity.
Mm-hmm.
That can be part of your fast. That can be part of your life where you're like, I'm praying for X, your friend. It could be anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But
struggling with our appetites is normal, you guys. I mean, I love food. I'll be the first to say it. Okay. I struggle with eating appropriately, being moderate. So when I'm talking to people about appetites, this is very real. And we see the consequence, right? If we eat too much, you gain some pounds. You drink too much, you're drunk, you're throwing up, you're passing out. And if you want to have sex kind of all the time, it's kind of in this whole kind of same sense. Like, doesn't everything get a little more attractive when you're trying not to have it or do it? Like, wow, beer sounds really good right now. I shouldn't have one. Yeah, But likewise, you have the candy jar in the kitchen sink, and pretty soon the candy's like, oh, it's always there. I could give or take it or whatever. So our intimate life, though, if we start to use our partner as an object to serve us instead of it being this mutual bond of loving each other and that intimate, loving life that is just so precious and so beautiful. And the thing is, like, you guys, if you have a beautiful, intimate life, you are so blessed. Because sadly, my friends, there are a large group of people who really struggle with that.
yeah.
And as someone who's taught NFP or been part of this journey for over 20 years, I've seen both sides. I see people who obviously struggle with trying to be chaste. And the whole thing with premarital sex and stuff is a majority of the people who struggle the most with that is because they weren't chaste before marriage. They don't remember how to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I often tell them, like, get it back. Tell the Lord, hey, I'm so sorry that I maybe didn't wait for marriage. So I'm going to give it to you now. Like, I'm giving it kind of like second virginity, like you kind of.
I think a lot of people, like, they get confused with the guilt. Like, they have so much guilt from it. Or, I mean, I guess I should speak for myself. I know I had a lot of guilt and I had to work through it a lot. And I do have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful priest that really helped me after I had my third kid. He was very, very helpful in my path to a better practice of NFP. But it is important. I haven't told my long story and I won't start now, but I had a husband that did not. He was not conforming with NFP. He was like, hey, do what you want to do. And that is a struggle. And that's why it is just so important to know what God calls you to do and then be patient and find the right partner that will conform. Because Jen, you were 33 when you got married, right?
31. But
31. Yes. Okay. I just remember when you I also remember a conversation like we were saying, you were just like, oh my gosh, what if I never have this? Like, you have all these kids, you're so blessed. And I'm over here ripping my hair out, feeling sorry for myself. and then you met Ryan and you guys have this gorgeous family. And when it happened, it was just such a joy. I remember when you had Joe, and it was just so exciting. We both came to Virginia and I was nursing Nancy and you were nursing Joe. Anyway, back to the sisterhood thing.
But you know what?
Chastity.
You have a really good point. And that's actually one of the things I'd like to lean into with you, Jen, is that you didn't get married until you were 31. And yet you were a virgin at 31. Not very many of us, if you did a informal survey with your girlfriends and your mothers and your grandmothers or whatever, asked, like, were you a virgin when you got married? So talk to us about the journey of that. Because like I said, we both met you when you were a single soldier and you were living a holy, chaste life. You had lots of guy friends. Personally, I don't remember whether you actually had a dating relationship. Share with us what that looked like. That's the question of the day. Like, how do we live in a world where sex is everywhere and we are called to be something different? What does it look like?
And before you jump on this, here's the thing. When I found this out with Jen, like, no, I'm saving myself for marriage. My mind was like, wait, what? This gorgeous woman in the army? Like, how has this miraculously happened? So to me, that says it can happen. And Jen has always been a gift to me that you can live a Catholic lifestyle and do hard things and still have a great time. And I think a lot of people equate suffering with Catholic Church, not like I get to fast for this thing or that thing.
Well, I mean, that came with some maturity. Obviously, I'm a little older now that I can articulate it that way. But growing up, you guys, I mean, my parents got divorced when I was 5. So, I mean, I knew that that wasn't what I wanted for my life, so I already knew I had to do something different, right? I had to find the right guy. I had to be patient. It was hard. I still like to date. I told my daughter just the other day, I said, if a guy had the bravery to ask me out, I said, unless there was like a huge red flag or it was just really kind of like, I'm not so sure. I always said yes. So, I mean, I would go on a date, but it's not like I led this guy on to think this date might end like he thinks. I was very upfront toward, into the date. I'd pay my own way unless they were like, no, I really want to pay. I'm like, well, that's kind. Thank you. But I had this idea of what I wanted, and I wasn't going to let anyone take me off from that. And that is, I want to be happily married. I want to be married to someone who loves kids and wants to have them with me and wants to stick it out with me. And that was the man that I was looking for.
Because I just want everyone to reflect on that. You had this image, you had a goal in mind that you wanted a man that was going to make babies with you and was going to live and help raise those babies with you. And you weren't willing to sacrifice, lower the bar, make amends, cut the corner, because you knew that there was a man out there that wanted the same thing. And I think that's the other aspect of it, is that sometimes these women, I meet them all the time, young adults, they're like, well, where is that guy? And yet a couple of weeks ago, I was at a retreat, and it was so funny because I was telling Vicki, I sat with a bunch of young people, and I was talking to this young man, and it's really fascinating how his life completely turned, went to college, and he had some medical stuff. And so his whole life completely went into a different direction. And we were talking, and he just kind of looked at me. He goes, I really wish somebody had told me that going to college, the purpose of going to college was to find a wife. And I just stopped, because that's what I hear from young women. And I just kind of jokingly like, dude, come on out to El Paso. I've got a whole group of girls that is waiting for you. But it's both sides of the coin, right? Like, men are looking for these women who want to be virtuous and holy. Like, I don't want to be someone that's not a virgin, because I want to be the one that's the first time. And the same thing with a woman. Like, I want a guy who will not expect sex after the first date, because he bought me
You bought me 3 meals.
Yeah, he bought me 3 meals. So this is what's supposed to happen, right?
Like when I give blood, and they're like, have you ever done anything for sex? I'm like, just getting taken out to dinner count? I just like to say, like, that's such a stupid question. I'm like, please. But Jane, the thing is that sometimes there would be hard times. I'd go on a date. I always went on the first date. We might have had a second date, but then after that, I'm starting to share more of like who I really am. Because I mean, I want this guy to know who I am. I'm not going to hide it and then like drop the bomb on him like later, like, let's get married. No, like, and then, there's room for conversion there. There's room for movement. And then there's also room to say, I mean, I probably dated 4 or 5, went on dates with young men, and we would talk about families, and they would be like, Jen, I don't really want to have kids. I said, well, then I won't waste your time, because I really do. You know what I mean? And you know what? Some people, when it comes to having kids nowadays, I know to ask people, where do you think the number of kids you want to have comes from? Does it come from a place of health? Does it come from a place of beauty and sharing and relationship? Or did you grow up poor and you want to give your kid everything? So you're like, I got to have one so they can have everything they want and everything they need. Well, I mean, sorry to break it to you, but that kid's going to be a brat. Don't do it. Like, give them a sibling. Okay. Someone, when they get married, they're not ridiculous,
Yeah.
And, being an army soldier and being around all these 20 somethings, a couple of them have some babies, mamas, and they're just doing their thing. And I'm like, guys, it's so much fuller and more beautiful. And we all want the same thing. to be loved, respected, live in relationship. It's just like the Trinity, living in relationship with others, friends, you name it. So I say it is by the grace of God, you guys. It is nothing special I did. I love the Lord since I was 7 years old. I was fully committed to him. That might be a little bit outside the normal outlier. But again, my mother was such a big help to me in my faith journey. And I learned from the lessons of others. I'm not that kid that has to do it myself. That's not me. So if someone else tells me a very sad story, I listen and I'm like, I don't have to do that. I can make different choices for my life. And I think if I do that, the outcome will be different. That's my hope, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is what I'm saying. I think you explained this so beautifully. And I think so many Catholic women and men don't have the hope. They're hopeless. And they think, oh, well, what if I do all the sacrificing? What am I really going to get? We're very selfish. Unfortunately, I mean, we want to please ourselves first. And what I love about this, like our sisterhood has 20 years has got us through some stuff, guys. I mean, we have held each other up in so many different ways and we'll continue to do so. We pray for each other. We pray for our families, our husbands, our children. We're the kind of people we could call up and just be like, for real. And that's all we need to say. Like, you're like, girl, I got you. You can pray through this. You didn't gently remind me like, hey, Vicky, babe, the sky is not falling, honey, not today. And that's just, I think our Catholic sisters and brothers need that. And, the Catholic men need to stay up to other men and be like, hey, nothing is better than a fantastic married life. I mean, sure, there's going to be rough patches because relationships are hard, all of them, with humans. And for the men to be able to be like, man, I love my wife. And to be able to really say that with confidence, for them to be able to leave the house. I mean, there are men out there that are like, what is my wife going to do? What are these army soldiers? What if I deploy? What's going to happen? And a marriage should not have that doubt. Yeah. And to find that person, it can't be on a one night stand. It can't be I'm accidentally pregnant. It can't be based on that. It has to be based on, that's why, I mean, people are like, oh, it takes so long to get married in the Catholic Church because it's a sacrament and it's for life.
Yeah.
Ideally.
You said something really powerful about that, committed, right? I remember one of the many times, because of course it's not rainbows and unicorns. It's sacrifice, it's hard work, it's suffering. I mean, that's why we have this community of sisterhoods, because there are times when we don't think we're going to make it and we think that the sky is falling down. And yet we have our sisters to remind us, like, back it up, girl. It's okay. But there was one particular time that Steve and I were going through some marriage counseling, and this was like a healing moment for us, is that this counselor spoke to us and said, marriage doesn't have a fire escape. When you think that you have a fire escape, then you're always going to look for the fire escape. But once you know that there is no door out and you were in this room together, then you better figure it out. And that was such a changing moment for both of us, because we knew that, because, immaturity, I'm leaving, we'd always make those silly threats. And yet when he spoke about that, it was like, yeah, that is a stupid threat because I'm not really going to leave. Why would I even threaten like that? Well, we threatened that because, like you said, Jen, I was exposed to a broken family. And maybe some of our listeners, that's all they knew. I mean, by the time I met Steve, his beloved mother, who I absolutely love so dearly, she was on her third husband. And I hadn't had the experience. My family of origin hadn't had any experience at the time of divorce. So I didn't know what divorce looked like. And I just remember that first Christmas because one of the ex-wives came with their kids. And I mean, it was just so, and I'm just sitting here like, and then of course, some of his sisters had already gotten divorced. And I just remember thinking like, this is crazy town. Like, you all are calling each other family and you're really not family. Listeners, I wasn't saying it judgmental. I was just trying to figure out like what is true and what is good and what is holy. And this doesn't fit that bill, but I couldn't figure it out. And they didn't know. I mean, the sexual revolution and the pill, like that made it easy for divorce. I'm going to be very passionate, and you and I know this because we're both fertility instructors. But Humana Vitae, from the time 1968 to 1978, divorce doubled in the United States. Now, you tell me how the pill was a benefit by introducing this. No, it doubled. And one of my dear coaching friends, she's in her late 40s, early 50s. She's like, you need to speak to us because we're the first generation of latchkey kids because our mothers were told to go out of the house and go get a job. And so we had to come home to an empty house. I mean, this whole disorder of things. And that's not what God wants. God has a much better plan. I mean, somebody asked me about, oh, you don't use a condom? Well, what about sexual diseases? And I'm like, if you only have one partner, there are no chances of sexual diseases because you've never had any kind of sex with anyone else to pass on anything.
Mm.
Also, I just think this is where I want to go back because maybe because it's my personal struggle. Is there any hope? And I come from a very broken family, family of I didn't know adults didn't drink to intoxication. I thought that was a way of life, but God always can bring good out of the brokenness. So yeah, my family definitely did not turn out how I thought it would when I met you, Jen. I never thought I would be where I am today, but God has brought good from it. I mean, is it perfect? No, because sometimes we sin and there's a consequence that can't be fixed, unfortunately. I mean, that's just the way it is, but forgiveness is always there and you can continue to walk on a path and he will put the hope in your life.
Because I would sometimes despair. I'd be like, Lord, where is my man? Whatever. And I'm not even kidding. I think one time I was driving around El Paso when I lived down there and I was like, Lord, where's my man? Like, is there anyone out there for me? And I'm not even kidding. Like 2 seconds later, this car drives by me with these 4 guys and they all kind of look at me and wave. And I was like, wow, Lord, that was nice. Okay. Hope renewed, I'm that easy. Hope renewed. A car, 4 boys can drive by and just wave at me. And I'm like, hope renewed.
Well, and a lot of us come from, we can have a whole other podcast about this, the mother wounds, the wounds that we show up with. And women do want to be loved and men want to be taken care of. And the definition of love in America, you're right, since the pill came out and sexual revolution, love everyone. I remember, I won't say which girl it was, but I had one of my daughters when she was in middle school. She was thinking she was all woke. And she was like, yeah, my friend so-and-so, she's pansexual. And I was like, what? She was like, yeah, she just loves love. And I was like, what? She was like, yeah, she just loves, whatever. It's not defining. I'm like, so boy, girl, naked squirrel. And she was like, Mom, that's so offensive. I'm like, no, this isn't a thing. What are you even talking about? We can't, you can't love lamp. Not in the way that a man and a woman are supposed to love each other and make a marriage and a family, but not in a marital way.
Yeah.
And the other thing, maybe this is our second episode in talking about NFP. Even in the most chaste best marriage, NFP is hard because if we decided together we don't want to have a baby, well, the women want to make babies in the fertile time. That's when you're like, I don't care how tired I am, let's go. And that is where I feel like in a good relationship, the man would go out of his way to do other things. Just to work together to find how to manage that without dissolving into argument.
And that is so key, Vicki, because most of the time, Jen, you can talk about this as well, because Jen is a market instructor for fertility, another method of natural family planning, and I'm Billings, but we do the same thing. We just teach it a different way. But people hear I have to abstain and they freak out instead of seeing, but we get to develop the relationship in other ways. And you and I were talking about this, about how excited you are when you have this intellectual conversation with your husband. And it was interesting when we had talked about that, I started thinking about the times, especially as a mother of small children, I've been saying no or singing the same cleanup song all day to have another human being to give me some sort of intellectual conversation. And it was interesting because the other night, my youngest son is home and his friend created this big band and they performed out in this outside mall area. Came home, he's talking about it and everything. And he's talking about all of these recordings and these artists. And I've always told everybody, I am not the musician. I just raise musicians. And it was so fascinating to hear my husband's wealth of knowledge on this. He was a musician and he played the trombone. And so he was having, I just literally closed my mouth and opened my ears and watched the two of them. And part of the benefit was just watching the two of them encounter each other and having this deep male conversation, the maleness, but then the musicianness. And I was so fascinating. but we don't talk about the other areas of our relationship. That's the beauty of the abstinence, because when you're abstaining from one area, you're focusing on another area.
Well, it's usually communication, Jane. I mean, that's
Yes.
where we always fall short on how to maybe communicate something that's meaningful to us, or, hey, I had this random thought the other day, or, I mean, you think about it, the coolest thing about today, and I'll share something with you guys. So, like I'll see a podcast or I'll listen to a song and I can like share with my husband right away. Like, well, send it to him, share. I see something cool, I can share it with my kids. Done. And then later we can talk about it. So then I love that. I do love that about modern technology today, and just
Mhm.
allowing all these different ways that we can communicate and
Mhm.
talk to each other about something cool. Yeah.
Hey, Catholic Divas. I hope you enjoyed this episode with our dear friend, Jen DellaCrosse. If you would like to hear her story a little bit more about her cancer, we have included in the show notes the link to her husband's podcast, The Catholic Talk Show, and the number that it's on. Please keep her and her family in your prayers. Thank you for listening.